Hello. Good morning. Is everyone coping with change is what we do. I woke up this morning to thunder, lightning, and rain and went, oh, great. Having seen them set up 70 chairs al fresco yesterday. But aren't we lucky that there's this theater right across the street? So first, thanks to Quin, the Lyceum Theatre, for the tucking and rolling and coping and accommodating. Secondly, I want to thank Ken Martinez and the Arrow Rock Coffee Company for shop in the Miller Bradford House. We have, if you haven't been to the Miller Bradford House lately, we have 2 boutiques and the coffee shop in there. If you're in fiber arts, we have a fantastic fiber art shop there now, thanks to Nancy Blossom. So thanks to all of those. As always, thanks to the incredible folks that I work with at the Friends of Arrow Rock and our Board of Trustees for supporting this highly unusual and very creative way of telling history. I think every iteration of the Voices of Arrow Rock just makes it much more of a foundational way that we have of communicating Arrow Rock's unique history in a way that opens it up wide to an audience that we might never have had before. So I have to do my little run through here. Of course, speaking of Murphy's Law, I went into the office this morning and I have 3 events today and a board meeting tomorrow, so naturally the copy machine went out and has an error message and service call on it. So forgive me on this one. So this is our 4th installment of the Voices of Arrow Rock. And this is actually part of a day-long observation of the May 1963 Declaration of Arrow Rock as a National Historic Landmark. So this afternoon we'll have all the historic buildings open for visitors to do a walking tour and to be able to get into buildings that might normally not be open. We'll also be offering a special ticketed guided historical tour of the properties that's hosted by our Historic Preservation Authority, Marty Selby. That is a $15 ticket, and Marty will sort of take the deep dive with you not only on each of the buildings and what we've done to preserve and protect them, but also maybe some helpful ideas about protecting your own historic property. My historic property that something falls off of every month or so. Tickets for the tour are available at the Friends shop on Main Street, and also if you are of a mind, friendsofarrowrock.org has a pop-up on it and you can pick up tickets right there. You can do that while you watch the show and annoy everyone. So our next First Saturday program on June 3rd will be Juneteenth in Missouri, A History by Gary Kramer. Gary has been a really popular speaker for us here. He's incredibly knowledgeable. He's the executive director of the State Historical Society of Missouri, and his presentation is about the history of Juneteenth, August 4th in Missouri, and why the celebration of this national holiday is an important component of the Missouri culture. And that'll be at Brown's Chapel Free Will Baptist Church over on High Street. Then in October, we have another installment of Voices of Arrow Rock. That'll be on October 7th, and also at the Brown's Chapel Free Will Baptist Church. The subject of this one is Voices of Arrow Rock, Ignore the Shadows. It tells the story of Arrow Rock residents Green and Nellie Wilson during the early 1880s. As Green Henry Wilson prepares to wed Nellie Robinson on November 24th, 1881 at Brown's Chapel in Arrow Rock, he struggles with his mixed race identity and what freedom truly means for them both. And that is being written, I believe, by Ricky Wilson, a descendant of the subjects of the performance. So thank you again for coming. Thank you for your generosity to the Friends of Arrow Rock. Thank you for attending and bringing people. I think every time we do a Voices of Arrow Rock, we have a few more and a few more and a few more. And I think it's really a testament, the success of this is a testament to the kind of the greatness of the idea and the uniqueness of the idea. Now, of course, the fellow responsible for this unique idea is going to come up and say a few words, provide some historical context so that you can enjoy the performance even more, I'd like you to welcome Dr. Michael Kateman.
Thanks, Jeff. Pippa's coming on, getting ready to perform. Using art to explore history, the Voices of Arrow Rock Readers Theatre series brings to life forgotten and underrepresented voices, their times and their spirits. And these voices are spanning the years since Arrow Rock was first mapped by French explorers way back in the early 18th century. As creator and producer, I'm really grateful to the Friends of Arrow Rock for sponsoring the project, and also to the Arrow Rock Lyceum Theatre for partnering with us. And especially today, thank you, Quin, for directing this episode and allowing us to come into the house. And I also want to throw a special thank you to my good friend, Ken Martinez, for all of his incredible support as we've been leading up to this performance, and also for the great muffins and coffee and scones this morning. Thank you very much. It's also really important for me to thank you, those of you who have invested with your philanthropic dollars to support Voices. You make the series possible, and we really appreciate your continuing support. But we certainly welcome new supporters for anyone who would like to contribute. And my good friend Marty Hodge, that I saw earlier, said, you've got to put out a donation box. So it's out, it's on the counter by the muffins if you're so inclined. Thanks, Marty, for that suggestion. Oh, there you are. Thank you, Marty. I hope you enjoyed the souvenir program that we prepared. Buzzy True said 2.5, 3 years ago when we were getting this started, you got to have something to document this just besides the video. And the souvenir program was born out of that idea. It really will help enhance your experience today after you've experienced the performance. And Dan Allman, someplace here in the audience, is the incredibly talented designer who puts that together for us each time. You are so generous, Dan, and really appreciate your support. I'm also thankful to our very busy hosts today. Besides the Lyceum, the State Historic Site is hosting us with the George Caleb Bingham House. They've done a great job keeping that historic landmark looking so great through the years. And I really appreciate Cindy Imhoff's leadership and the whole team with the historic site. Sandy Selby and Tammy Kateman-Rodick will be your tour guides at the Bingham House after the performance. If you'd like to go see where George Caleb Bingham and Sarah Bingham lived and where he did some painting, they will take you through that lovely space. We're delighted, and I'm a little intimidated, to have a couple of guests with us today. I'd like to welcome Joan Stack today. She is the curator of art collections at the State Historical Society of Missouri, and she is indeed the quintessential George Caleb Bingham scholar. It's just an honor to have you here. And I'd also like to extend a welcome to Melissa Wolf, who is the curator of American art at the St. Louis Art Museum. She and her team do this most extraordinary work in St. Louis, and part of that work is stewarding the George Caleb Bingham paintings and the drawings that are in their care. Today's title of our episode is County Election. The St. Louis Art Museum owns that painting along with two of the others in the trilogy, and we're just honored to have you here, Melissa, with your partner, Scott. Thank you so much. People, places, and things make an indelible mark in our lives. These moments are really pivotal to who we are as human beings. And one of those marked moments, for me, occurred across the street at the George Caleb Bingham House in 1976. As the nation prepared for its bicentennial that year, my mom, Georgia Dear Kateman, was busy at her sewing machine. She was making my sister Beth and me 18th century period costumes so we could be in character as we were docents for the Friends of Arrow Rock, sharing the village's history with our neighbors and visitors alike. The costumes Mom designed and made were such a big deal at our house that she hired a professional photographer from Lee's studio in Marshall to forever capture us wearing them. And if you're curious, the photograph is in the program. We were photographed together by the wood rail fence that surrounded one of Mom's flower beds at the home place where I grew up, Willow Grove Farm, just 4 miles south of the village. Now, our first assignment as docents was playing the pump organ at the old Christian church on Main Street. Beth and I debuted our costumes, and we received a lot of compliments about how we were dressed, as well as for our hymn playing, which was kind of a surprise because neither of us were very serious musicians as children. Throughout the year, Beth and I were then assigned to other buildings, and we were paired with adult docents. And one of my favorite memories of volunteering was being assigned to the George Caleb Bingham House with Helen McDaniel, and I'm so happy to welcome her children here today in the front row. This was that marked moment I mentioned earlier. Oh, and by the way, that moment that happened there almost 50 years ago, there was kind of a somewhat scandalous incident that occurred that Miss Helen and I kept secret for all these years until today. But you'll learn more about it during the performance. So how's that for a teaser? Also, Beth's and my costume are on display in the Bingham House today, along with Miss Helen's. And thanks to Ken Martinez for curating those costumes. Now, Miss Helen was older than my mother, but younger than my grandmother. And her soft Southern drawl mesmerized me as we sat elegantly attired, chatting in the Bingham House, waiting for visitors to stop by. She told tales of falling in love with Arrow Rock when she visited her uncle, Fletcher C. Augurbright, from her native Tennessee. And he, by the way, was one of the founders of the Lyceum. Red and his wife, Lucia, purchased the Federal-style Price House on Main Street in Arrow Rock in 1935 for $3,000 after they had considered the Hogue Farm with its Federal-style house just outside of the village, but they declined because it was listed for $5,000. And together they restored the Price House. Red worked for the Corps of Engineers. Lucia was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution chapter that helped save the J. Houston Tavern here in Arrow Rock in the 1920s, along with her grandmother, Nettie Proctor Dixon. Miss Helen inherited the home in 1975. She and her husband, Johnny, completed additional renovations. And then in 2003, Dr. Shelby Gregory and Karen Murray purchased the property. Dr. William Price and Mary Ellen Sappington Price built that Federal-style home on Main Street in Arrow Rock in 1838. Mary Ellen was the youngest daughter of Dr. John and Jane Sappington. Now, Dr. Sappington, as you all may know, was known for developing quinine, a quinine pill to treat and to prevent malarial and other fever diseases. He manufactured and sold Dr. Sappington's anti-fever pills, becoming quite wealthy. And additionally, he was a financial lender. He imported and exported goods here from Saline County. And he was the patriarch of a Missouri political dynasty, which produced 3 Missouri governors during the mid to late 1800s. 2 of those governors, Meredith Miles Marmaduke and Claiborne Fox Jackson, are buried in the Sappington Cemetery just outside of Arrow Rock. Dr. Price was a native of Maryland, and he and Mary Ellen Sappington were married in Arrow Rock on September 24th, 1835. He began practicing medicine in Arrow Rock after their marriage. The Prices also built a home a little over a mile outside of Arrow Rock right before the Civil War. Folklore says it was too rambunctious and rowdy in Arrow Rock, so they had a country home. And in 1850, the Prices enslaved 21 African Americans, 11 of whom were under the age of 10. There were 9 slave dwellings and residences on the 2 properties. In her 2008 article for Commonplace, the Journal of Early American Life, Dr. Laura Ridgell writes that between 1853 and 1859, Saline County and adjoining Pettis and Carroll counties endured 7 black-on-white lynchings, acts construed by the white participants as acts of popular justice. In Arrow Rock, for example, over 1,000 people turned out for the 1859 lynching of an unnamed slave owned by Dr. William Price. The slave was accused of molesting a 12-year-old white girl. 14 years earlier, in 1845, George Caleb Bingham painted portraits of Dr. and Mrs. Price. His solid reputation for excellence in portraiture began in 1830 as a 19-year-old who charged $20 per portrait, often completing the work in one day. He found most of his clients in Howard and Saline counties, and by 1833, he was able to support himself with his portraiture. In 1836, he married Sarah Elizabeth Hutchinson, and they built their house in 1837, and that's where he honed his signature style of portraiture and landscape paintings featuring Missouri and its people. The house was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1965. In 1852, Bingham completed the county election, which today is owned and stewarded, as I mentioned, by the St. Louis Art Museum. It's the first painting in Bingham's trilogy depicting the American political process of democracy. It features Arrow Rock and its male residents. Bingham had high hopes for this painting's success. In his January 31st, 1852 letter to Goupy and Company, he writes, "My county election has excited more interest than any of my previous productions, and my friends here propose to raise a sum which will enable me to publish it in superior style upon a large scale." Goupil and Company published the painting with an engraving by John Sartain in New York, Paris, London, and Berlin in 1854. Stump Speaking, which was painted in 1854, and The Verdict of the People, which was painted in 1855, complete this election trilogy. These paintings are also owned and stewarded by the St. Louis Art Museum. In their commentary at the museum, the curators point out that Bingham reveals in the series what every American supportive of an election understand, that the democratic ideal must be embraced even though uninformed votes could prevail. The commentary on The Verdict of the People points out that the women portrayed in the balcony and the enslaved man in the left foreground of that painting represent 2 populations without a voice in government at that time. The women were temperance or anti-alcohol reformers. Bingham and many other Americans believed that the movements advocating for temperance and the abolition of slavery were closely linked, as both slavery and drunkenness were viewed as destructive impositions on natural freedom. Bingham's views on slavery were complicated. His family had owned slaves for generations. The 1850 census schedule of Saline County records Bingham enslaving 2 human beings, a 21-year-old woman and a 53-year-old man. Yet, in Bingham's 1855 painting, he declares that slavery is a destructive imposition on natural freedom. Dr. Ridgell's research shows that in 1853, Bingham purchased 4 more human beings. She writes, nonetheless, Bingham's overarching political concern was to preserve the Union through peaceful compromise. The artist's enemy was anyone, be they abolitionist or pro-slavery Southerner, who threatened the law and order of the federal system. Hence, as the conflict over slavery intensified and the Whig Party disintegrated, Bingham allied himself with President Lincoln and the Black Republicans. When war came, Bingham served the Union in Missouri. However, the Union General Thomas Ewing issued Order Number 11, exiling several thousand people from their homes in western Missouri in an attempt to quell the guerrilla warfare along the Kansas and Missouri border. Bingham became even more conflicted and disillusioned, resulting in his painting by the same name. My research shows that African Americans appear in 2 of his election series paintings and in 2 other paintings. The African American man in the county election painting, whom we've given the title The Barkeep for this production, may very well be the 53-year-old man that Bingham enslaved. Bingham was known for sketching local residents one by one and later using those sketches when building a painting. The Barkeep has always intrigued me. Bingham painted him smiling as he poured some libation from his jug. This perpetuated the happy slave narrative I was taught growing up in Arrow Rock. Oh yes, Mike, there were slaves in Arrow Rock, but they were happy slaves, and they were well treated. That's the answer I was given on numerous occasions as a young boy volunteering for the Friends of Arrow Rock. It was not until that day in 1976, over in the Bingham house, when I asked Miss Helen why she thought the black guy in the county election was smiling, did that happy slave narrative get challenged in my mind. It was during our conversation where, for the first time, I made a connection to the realities of slave labor. It also left me with a notion that Arrow Rock may have had slaves, but I still wanted to believe they were happy slaves. After all, the barkeep in Bingham's painting was smiling. But I did wonder how slaves could be happy. Miss Helen's answer, which I won't spoil for you before the performance, was based on the stone gutters along Main Street in the village. As I recall, I was pretty matter-of-fact in my thinking about the stone gutters as a 13-year-old, having known for as long as I can remember that they existed. Today, just as I was as a child, residents have to cross Main Street at an angle when they're driving, lest they risk scraping the undercarriage of their vehicle. And you always know when there's a visitor in town when you hear that loud scraping sound of the car hitting the stone gutters. And back in the day as kids, we'd laugh when some of the adults driving didn't know how to properly cross the stone gutters. The stone gutters are an ever-present part of Arrow Rock that serve as a reminder of the village's and the nation's history of racial oppression and injustices. The gutters were completed between 1854 and 1858 to create a stormwater system for the village that's still in use today. Enslaved black men dug by hand a 2-foot trench on both sides of Main Street, hand-cut thousands of stones and then lay the stones in the trench. As Miss Helen and I chatted about those gutters almost 50 years ago, I recall that my thinking didn't dwell so much on the enslaved men's lives as it did on my thoughts that the town needed gutters on Main Street. These men dug them out, laid the stone, and that was that. I realized slave labor built the gutters, but the idea that the human laborers were owned by human residents in the Arrow Rock area had never occurred to me. As a new teenager, the reality of a person being owned by another person in the United States was kind of lost on me as I was caught up in the pomp and the circumstance of the Bicentennial celebration. Looking back, I had a romanticized version of the United States and of Arrow Rock history. My conversation with Miss Helen challenged that, and it started my coming of age journey. George Caleb Bingham has long been one of my heroes. He is my very favorite artist. The county election, watching the cargo, and fur traders descending the Missouri adorn my walls at home. I have multiple books on Bingham in my library. Our heroes are human, and not one of them is perfect. For me, coming of age included not only an introduction to that reality, but an ultimate acceptance of it. Does that mean I enjoy Bingham's work less? No. I just understand it more completely now that I have context. The same holds true of antebellum homes, like the Price House. As a child, I so admired how Miss Helen lovingly restored and decorated that house. When my cousin, Shelby Gregory, and his beloved Karen Murray bought the house in 2003, I was in awe of how they made it their own, infusing it with their amazing collections and their works of art. As I gaze at the portraits of William and Mary Ellen Price that Bingham painted, I still see handsome people who lived a privileged life, working to build a strong community in Arrow Rock, but I acknowledge and I accept the reality that they owned human beings, and in doing so, they created so much tragedy and so much painful oppression. I no longer romanticize our past. I embrace it for what it was. I endeavor to learn from their imperfections and their mistakes. And I'm really, really thankful for that pivotal moment that took place in that house across the street. Episode 4 of Voices of Arrow Rock is titled County Election. Playwright Brady Kateman, my younger son, and poet Glenn North, whom you'll meet in just a moment, bring to life this moment in time from our nation's bicentennial. It gives voice to the barkeep who has left an indelible mark on my life. As our director, Quin Gresham, points out, this story and those like it look beyond dates and historical figures to see history through the eyes of human beings. And once history becomes human, it can really teach us something about who we are and who we want to be. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give you county election.
You folks look like you could use a drink. I must admit, I'm a little parched too. But there is no ale that can quench my thirst. No whiskey that will do. I would love a sip of freedom, a full glass of democracy. Oh, to be drunk with liberation would satisfy my need. Born on the tip of Bingham's brush, onto a canvas of captivity, eternally witnessing an election that excludes men who look like me, hanging on wall after wall for over a century now. One thing is apparent to me: I will never be satisfied with distilled spirits until my soul is free.
Well now, don't you look dapper?
Thanks, Miss Helen. Mom made me and my sister costumes for the Bicentennial, and the Lee's studio came out to the farm to take our picture in the flower bed.
Well, you'll have to show it to me sometime.
I don't think Beth liked getting a picture taken. Mom said the photographer earned every single penny she paid him.
Beth doesn't seem the type to want to sit still too long.
No, she doesn't, but I kind of like the costume. I think Mary Jo and Robbie Stiff have costumes too.
Lots of us have costumes around here, especially us ladies of a certain age.
Are we gonna have many visitors today?
We might. Is this your first time greeting at the Bingham house?
Yep, I've only been in the Christian church so far.
Oh, well, I heard you and your sister did a right nice job playing the organ there last week.
Yeah, it was fun. The pedals stick a little, but it sounded kind of neat. We took turns playing. My absolute favorite is What a Friend We Have in Jesus.
Oh, and what's Beth's favorite?
I don't know. Maybe In the Garden. We both like God Will Take Care of You.
Mighty fine that y'all play those hymns. I'm sure your grandma Kateman is right proud of you too.
Yeah, she likes it when we play. She said your uncle gave your house to you.
Well, he sure did. Uncle Fletcher Augubright. Townspeople called him Red. Oh, what a character.
Why did they call him Red?
Well, honey, he had bright red hair when he was younger. Kind of like Lucille Ball.
I love Lucy. Did your uncle have a costume?
Oh, yeah. He had a few. His favorite was a big top hat he wore it in the Tom Sawyer movie.
Why'd he give it to you?
The house?
Yeah.
Well, when my Uncle Fletcher died, he left it to me. It's called an inheritance. He actually bought it way back in 1935, and it needed a lot of work because it was almost 100 years old. Uncle Fletcher and his wife, Lucia, restored it, bringing it back to its grandeur.
Who built it?
A fella named William Price. He was a doctor here in town and helped out a lot of people.
He may have helped a lot of people, but certainly none who looked like me. Tell me, Doc, what is the cure for chattel slavery? You were perhaps a fine physician and a legend of Arrow Rock history, but how you, with a clear conscience, owned other humans remains a mystery to me. I think of Frederick Douglass, brilliant orator and abolitionist who taught himself to read. That's the kind of example everybody needs. Or the inimitable David Walker, whose anti-slavery manifesto appeal to the colored citizens of the world was practically written in fire. These are the type of men that I choose to admire. Men who embraced risk, men who lived lives of sacrifice. They may not have been wealthy doctors, but they were willing to pay the price.
Hey, how old are you now, Mike?
13.
13. Teenager. Yes, indeed. Well, you're old enough to come try some of my Jenner's homemade peach flips. I brought some with me, figuring we might need a little refreshment.
What's a peach flip?
Hey, it's a cocktail drink. Jenner Emerson's secret recipe with frozen peaches and lemonade, powdered sugar, and vodka blended with ice. It's real tasty.
Will I get in trouble?
No, I won't tell if you won't.
Sometimes I take a drink of my dad's highball, and Mom makes me a hot toddy when I have a cough.
Oh, so
I won't tell.
there you go. You're not doing anything you haven't already done, Mr. 13-year-old.
Yep, and I'm 13 during the Bicentennial. It's neat that there were 13 states when our country started, and I'm 13 years old while we're celebrating its 200th birthday.
Well, now, isn't that something? You're quite a patriotic young man, aren't you?
I sure am. I have pictures of George Washington and Abe Lincoln in my room, and a Betsy Ross flag. That's the one with 13 stars.
Yes, it is. How's that peach flip?
It's tasty, Miss Helen. I like it a lot.
Well, here now. Oh, here, put your glass down. We have visitors. Welcome to the George Caleb Bingham House. Now, I hope you all minded the stone gutters and didn't scrape up your cars. I'm Helen, and this is Mike. We'll be your guides today. Now, firstly, I'll draw your attention to this painting, the county election, completed in 1852. It depicts the great American tradition of the democratic voting process. Now, you'll notice this piece figures every sort of white man there is. But the interesting part is that some of these fellers could be the ancestors of our population here in Arrow Rock. The scene is in Missouri, after all. Now, this fella here, for example, could very well be Dr. William Price, who built the Federal Style House on Main Street. He practiced medicine here in Arrow Rock. Mike, do you recognize anybody here?
Well, my grandma thinks our ancestor, George Fenwick, might be in there. He was a justice of the peace. I know these two are the Thorntons, Mary Jo and Robbie Stitt's great-great-great-grandparents.
Yeah, but those are both boys.
Are you sure?
But yes, because when this painting was made, women couldn't vote, as you folks may be aware, so you'll only see fellas at this election.
So Beth couldn't vote back then? Or my mom? Or Mary Jo?
No, they couldn't. Neither could I.
That's dumb.
Yes, it is.
I have heard countless conversations over the expanse of years, but the one I'm listening to now is bringing me to tears. Out of the mouths of babes, love and empathy flow. But when the child grows up, where does that empathy go? Will little Mike grow up to fight the things he now calls dumb? Would a black barkeep like me be respected by the man that Mike becomes?
Well, thank you all for coming.
Hey, Miss Helen, do you think the barkeep is pouring peach flips out of that jug?
He might be.
Because they make me feel that happy too.
Oh, honey, well, he didn't get to drink it. He just poured it.
What do you mean?
Well, he was a slave.
But he looks so happy. He's smiling. Why do you think he's smiling?
Oh, honey. Well, he probably didn't have to work on the stone gutters. I bet he'd much rather be pouring drinks than building gutters.
I'd rather drink peach flips than build gutters, too.
But he didn't get a choice, see? If they told him to go out and build those gutters, he would have to do it. He'd have to join the other slave men who were digging out those gutters all the way up and down Main Street. That's how the laws of our country used to be.
To quote my favorite poet, Paul Laurence Dunbar, "We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile." What a stunning symbol the stone gutters have turned out to be, a reminder of Black folks' place in so-called American democracy. The sewage, the wreck and ruin of white supremacy, has all of us treading water in a trough of racial insanity. Conversely, the fact that the gutters remain intact with superior structural integrity is a reflection of the strength of the Black community.
So he went to jail if he didn't?
Not exactly. It was like he was in jail all the time. He would have to plant and harvest crops, or clean the house, or build gutters. All kinds of hard work. And when he was done, he had to go home. That barkeep couldn't put on costumes and get his picture taken or go to church and play the organ.
Oh.
He didn't get paid, and he didn't have any inheritance either. But things have come a long way. President Lincoln made sure no one can own slaves anymore. Everyone gets paid for the work they do. And then men finally voted to change the laws so Black folks and women can vote now.
So let's start with President Lincoln. With our country ripped apart, he would have done just about anything to end the Civil War. Yes, he emancipated enslaved Black people. He set the captives free. But what he also wanted was for all Black folks to leave. This is not revisionist history. I don't want you to feel misled, but according to primary sources, here's exactly what he said. "I can hardly believe the South and North can live in peace unless we get rid of the Negroes. I believe it would be better to export them all to some fertile country." And yes, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a watershed moment in the fight for civil rights. But if we, with due diligence, are actually keeping stock with gerrymandering and voting restrictions, many states are turning back the clock.
But I thought our country was a free country.
Well, it is, honey. It's getting freer all the time.
Miss Helen,
What, kiddo?
can I still be patriotic?
Well, yes, honey, absolutely. We can all be patriotic. We just have to keep working together to make our country better. Because there is still a lot of work to do.
I will forever be pouring drinks for drunken Democrats with my painted-on smile, despite the inescapable fact that in America's attempt to address the problem of race, we will never fix what we refuse to face. We have to examine history with an unflinching and critical eye, learn to accept the truth we can no longer afford to deny. And please don't call me unpatriotic. I have loved this country even as I am enslaved. As our national anthem states, land of the free, home of the brave. It has always been my people and those who have been oppressed that hold America's feet to the fire, that put democracy to the test. So as Bingham's painting, County Election celebrates the power of the voting booth, the only question now is, what will you elect to do?